Case of the week. What will cause a 6-year-old to be losing his mind, to be highly, highly impulsive, to be highly distractible? The kid that just can't sit still, just constantly going, but not just can't sit still, just constantly reacting, having tantrums and meltdowns, and just being very dysregulated is probably the best way to put it. Across the board, from attention to focus to controlling his body to moods. What will cause all of this in a 6-year-old? Now, we'll call this guy Sebastian again. I change all of this all the time to protect the kid's identity. But Sebastian was a 6-year-old where ultimately, on top of just wreaking havoc in the home, one of the flags that went off is the teachers are like, you guys need to do something. Like this kid just can't control himself in the classroom. He's really creating a lot of chaos. Maybe you should go see a psychiatrist. Maybe he needs ADHD medications, right? That's the conversation that happens when we've got the kid that can't control themselves. The conversation that comes next is like, well, maybe you should think about putting him on ADHD meds because that is ADHD, right? Inattention and impulsivity and hyperactivity are basically the telltale signs of ADHD. Like, that actually helps us understand what is causing a kid to have that, right? So what was causing Sebastian to have ADHD along with all kinds of different mood issues and problems? And, part of why I'm sharing this story with you is one, sadly, these stories are not that uncommon. And two, had Sebastian been put on medications, what would have happened next is that his behaviors would have continued. So the 6-year-old would have not just ended up on Ritalin, Adderall, Vyvanse, whatever you want. He would have also probably been put on an antidepressant or some kind of other medication to control his behaviors, right? And that's what we do to 6-year-olds. And that's why I'm sharing this message with you, because medications are fine. I have no problem with them at all. I prescribe them. And for all of you adults and others that are on meds, that's fine. If they're helping you, great. I have nothing against it. But you know what? When we throw a medication at something without even understanding what that something is and why it is occurring, I believe that we're not acting in the highest interest of the child. We can still use the medications, and if someone needs medications, great. But let's also ask what the heck is going on in this person to cause them to be irritable and reactive and inattentive and can't sit there still and can't pay attention. What would cause this in a 6-year-old? Well, in the case of Sebastian, there were also a few other things going on. One, he was having random belly pains, not all the time, but at least a few times a week, where he's just like, ow, my stomach hurts. And the other thing that was really weird about Sebastian is on occasion, rarely, but on occasion, he would be like, Mom, my elbow hurts. And she just thought like, oh, he was just playing too hard and he probably banged in something, but it had gone on for months, all of this. So we did some blood work on Sebastian. And what we actually found was that his system was highly, 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 highly inflamed. He had anti-nuclear antibodies, which are basically a sign of, in adults, we use it to check for lupus. In kids, I just check to see how messed up is their immune system. Like, is their immune system going upside down and is it ready to start attacking stuff? Anti-nuclear antibodies can help us kind of get a gauge of like how messed up or dysregulated is his immune system. We checked this thing called the SED rate, ESR, and his SED rate was elevated. It wasn't scary elevated to the point where you're just like, oh my God, he needs to go to the emergency room, but it was elevated. This kid was inflamed. His entire body was inflamed. His brain was inflamed. And you know what? When you have inflammation, one of the things that happens, and it's very, very indicative of an inflammatory response, kids that are aggressive, kids that are intensely impulsive, they're just like want to explode. That explosiveness is typically an inflammatory process, whether it's Lyme, mold, Bartonella, mycoplasma, viruses, food, anything that causes inflammation to this thing causes this weird explosive tendency, which is one of the things that tipped me off, along with his belly pains and joint pains. So we ultimately decided to, without doing a lot of fancy testing, we just decided to take Sebastian off gluten, dairy, and do some things to help calm down his gut. What was really cool is that within 2 months, it wasn't overnight, within 2 months, all of a sudden the parents are like, you know what? We haven't seen Sebastian explode recently. Now that I think about it, he hasn't really had any major problems. Teachers found him to be more calmed and regulated. Overall, he was actually able to manage himself. And what was really interesting about Sebastian was the dad was like, well, I don't know if this is working. Maybe Sebastian just grew out of this stuff. And you know what? That was fine. I'm like, you may be right. You may be right. Maybe Sebastian does grow out of it. So what do? We're like, let's put him back on gluten. Let's let him eat the foods. Boom. Week and a half, 2 weeks later, all of a sudden, this kid is losing his mind again. All of a sudden, the reactive, can't manage himself Sebastian was back. It was almost like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. And within 2 weeks, like, boom, kid went from one thing to another. Now, this kind of thing is not uncommon. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of these kinds of things where, in this case, specifically, the inflammation from his gut was triggering such a massive immune response that was hitting this thing. And guess what? When the brain is inflamed, it is not happy. The brain does not like inflammation. It does not like inflammation. And there's all kinds of studies, sadly animal studies for the most part, where they've taken these poor animals and injected them with all kinds of different inflammatory compounds. And one of the things they found was that these animals were distracted. They were having trouble going through the mazes that they were able to go to before. Animals were starting to attack one another. They were showing signs of anxiety. So all of these things have been documented in the literature. And for those of you that are curious, Dr. Perlmutter's book, Grain Brain, actually talks about this in beautiful detail and how all of these things, and there's tons of books on the gut-brain connection and all of these things are real. Now, as you've seen in the past, one of the things that I'm trying to do is not get us pigeonholed in this box that every kid that has these things all has gut, because that's not the case. But in the case of Sebastian, it sure as hell was true. By changing the diet, by helping kids become healthy, whatever that means, whether it's doing some kind of auditory processing, occupational therapy, plants to balance out the hormones, addressing chronic infections in Lyme and mold, doing whatever it takes to bring the body back into health, we can completely flip around a lot of the neurocognitive challenges, the brain challenges that kids have. In fact, probably a lot of the challenges that adults have, because I'm sure there's some of you out there watching, you're like, that's me. Yeah, I've got stomach issues. I've had stomach issues forever. Or maybe it's your spouse. Yeah. Or whomever. There's someone around. There's someone around that is showing this kind of presentation. And again, medications are fine. But does that fix the underlying problem? Does that actually bring health? Absence of symptoms is not health. Vitality, happiness, good mood, ability to process and learn and thrive, that is health. And that is what I want to share with you and what I hope you can share with others. So thanks for watching. Thank you for your time. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.